Hey everybody, it's Elliot. Just a quick note before the podcast gets started. We had some audio issues today. I had some throat issues and it produced a first 35 or 40 minutes or so that aren't the best on the ears. So I apologize about that. What I am going to do in return is promise you that the next pod will be audio dynamite. It will be so good that tears will be streaming down your face, not just from the quality of the content, but from the quality of the audio as well. So my sincere apologies. I hope the podcast is still listenable, but I will warn you that the first section with me, Clive, and Paul isn't ideal audio-wise. There's a later section with me and Mark Thompson about Gabriel that should be no problem. So here's the pod. I hope you like it. We'll make it up to you on the next one.
Arteta! What a strike! What a screamer! What a fantastic goal! Arsenal back in it! And here's Limpar, lines it up, finds the net. Arsenal in front.
Alexis Sanchez recorded blubbering about how he regretted his move to Manchester United after just one training session. He then pulled out a £1 million note and blew his nose into it. This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name is Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. That's right. I don't know if you've seen the video. Alexis Sanchez claims to have known after one training session that he regretted leaving Arsenal. And I feel for him. I hope that the £500,000 per week was some solace. Maybe was able to take additional piano lessons, get a dog trainer or two. I'm sure he found some way to get by. But maybe just stay with Arsenal. Maybe make less money, he said, laughing. Pause on Twitter, pause my pants, slow pause.
Maybe give the ball away less.
Oh, for God's sake, we're going to do it. Let's relitigate that. Let's do that. That'll be our pod for today. Clive's on Twitter, CliveBFC. Hello, Clive.
Hello, it is.
Mark Thompson at everyteam_Mark coming up at the end of this section with a bit of a scouting report on Gabriel Magalhaes. Magalhaes. I love saying it. So you'll want to stay tuned for that. I did some terrible questions, but he did some fantastic answers. So it all worked out in the end. Let's get on to the news of the day, friends. We're going to talk a little bit of transfer rumors. It's not a ton happening, as I think all of us sort of bite our nails in anticipation of the Thiago Coutinho party and Aouar signings to be announced. Interestingly, I'm going to just ask you something, Paul, that we didn't even discuss pre-podcast as something we were going to discuss, but it just jumped into my mind. Are you at all curious as to what the holdup is with an Aubameyang announcement? Do you have any concern that maybe it's not going to happen? Maybe that we're changing our mind? Maybe let him leave for free next summer? Maybe it's not a priority because both parties know it's going to get done and they're not urgently doing it? Like, what's your read on why this thing that was supposed to be announced any minute has, in many minutes, not been announced?
Yeah, it's definitely a bit odd. Am I worried? I don't think so. Based on his grinning face in the training photos, Willie came to town. He said he was going to come in. He couldn't say why. Blah blah blah. I know it all feels very positive vibes. So I guess it can only go in one direction from there. So it's either a signing or it goes bad. So I guess there is some concern. It can't be on a more positive trend. It's weird though. I can't think of a reason they're not doing it, unless somebody else has got something. But maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's just nothing's that easy to arrange in these COVID times of getting people together, and maybe Jarabchian's had back-to-back barbecues in his place, and they just can't free up the spot for him. I don't know. It is a little odd. On the other hand, perhaps we've all just taken it as it's going to happen when it's going to happen, and even Arsenal don't feel they'd rather do it exciting with a big splash, and it's more about timing than it is about getting it done quick, because everybody's we've all kind of settled into the idea is coming. There's no. I guess the one thing you'd say is Arsenal don't really have any bodies they need to cover up at the moment. No bad vibes, no negativities. There's no reason for them to rush it, apart from we do seem to take a long time to do these things.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things at play here, right? I mean, is it possible that KSE wants us to shift some of the big earners to make room for what we're going to put Aubameyang on? Is there a discussion about how to resolve the Ozil situation? Is there, a potential departure for someone like Kolasinac? Mkhitaryan's leaving. These are guys that are on relatively big wages that would free up room. Are they trying to evaluate who the incomings are going to be and what their wages need to be to keep the wage bill kind of all balanced and put together? It's a big jigsaw puzzle, and there are a lot of pieces still to fall into place. I think it is redolent to me a bit of the Alexis and Ozil summer where we didn't sell either. Alexis winds up going in a swap in January, and Ozil winds up getting the big new deal in January as well. There is no need for us to sign him right now, I suppose. And maybe the benefit of kicking the can down the road is it's a few more months. You don't have to pay him £250,000, £280,000 a week. He does have another year on the deal. Is it possible, Clive, that they're looking at this and saying, you know what? One more year of Aubameyang on these wages and losing him for free might be better than 3 more years of Aubameyang on 270, 280, 290 a week. I mean, is there possibly a rethink going on here? Is it balancing all of the different wage needs and trying to piece them together? Or is it simply that this is going to get done and it's just a process that's taking a bit longer than we think? What's your read on this? Because I think there are a variety of angles the club could be taking, and with Raul gone, it's also possible that the thinking on it has changed as well.
It's possible. I don't believe it is. I just think it's about announcing and the final crossing of the T's and dotting of the I's and choosing when to send out some news, spacing it away from the Gabriel signing, spacing it away from Ceballos re-signing and Aubameyang re-signing. I'm sure before we start the league season that will be announced. I'm sure that the details are done. You can tell by the lack of rumours there are around him going to another club, which means other clubs have been shut down. Right, so because he's going to stay, and everything that you see, read, hear, and we're all the same. We're all the same as fans. Look at all the pictures. We follow all the same ITKs. So we know exactly what's out there, the rumours, etc. So. Yeah, for me, it's a done deal. Elliot, you're naturally suspicious, right? So often,
yep. Just ask my wife. That's why I have all that spyware on her phone. Mm-hmm.
And what worries me is that on many occasions, you are correct. On this one, you're probably a little bit sensitive.
You're wrong.
You're a little bit sensitive due to your love for the player, and you're probably thinking, why isn't it done? Well, it don't have to suit us, and there's different things with family coming over and promotional videos, and anyone who comes over has got to wait a week or so before we can get them to do anything. It's just a very complex time at the moment, so I wouldn't worry too much. It's just a matter of when, not if. That makes sense.
Yeah, well, and to be clear, I'm the idiot who's not convinced that signing him is 100% right. I still think there's downside that we may be looking at, in 2 years, wondering if we made the right move. It's weird to me just because I think people act like we either sign him or we lose him. And there is a third option, which is if there's no good offer for him, are you better having Aubameyang for 1 season on relatively reasonable wages? Or are you better off having Aubameyang for 3 more seasons, really into the mid-30s, on very, very big wages? And I don't think, Paul, it's, look, in general, I don't believe you should lose assets for free. I don't think that's good for you long term. But, we do have to balance some wages. We I think it was on the Patreon pod, we did a totting up of the sales and the purchases and how it could all work out. And I think we arrived at a conclusion where we could get Aouar, we could get Partey, they both could come. And that didn't involve selling Aubameyang, obviously. It did involve selling Lacazette. It did involve selling, I believe it was Hector Bellerin or Maitland-Niles. I can't remember right off the top of my head. But what I would say, Paul, is that if you bring those guys in and your team looks pretty good and you don't have to raise Aubameyang's wages and you keep him for 1 more season, and then next season Ozil's wage is gone, Aubameyang's wage is gone, Mkhitaryan's wage is gone, Kolasinac's wage is gone, and you look around and you say, we've got another, £1 million a week to distribute and a pretty good midfield now of all things. And maybe now you do need to make a splash for a striker, but you have the money to do it. And, maybe Martinelli's developed a little more in Saka and so on. I mean, I'm making an argument that I can't even say I totally believe in, but I think the idea that having Aubameyang for 3 more seasons or 4 more seasons into his mid-30s on huge wages. The idea that that is definitely better than 1 more season of Aubameyang on lower wages, I don't think it is definitely better. I don't think you can say definitively that where we're headed, 33-year-old Aubameyang is essential to get us there. Do I think he's essential for this season? He absolutely is. I will not dispute it, not even remotely. Is 32 and 33-year-old Aubameyang essential to getting us where we want to go on 280 a week or whatever it winds up being? I think that is a much more open question than people act. Am I crazy?
Hand over the baton there.
Sorry, I just kept adding to it. I just kept adding to it. It's like one of those art projects Bob Ross used to do, and he'd be like, "No, we're going to add some happy clouds." I'm like, "No, Bob, it's perfect. Oh, no, that looks good too."
So I think that of the 3 deals, the worst deal is buying him and owning him for the next 3+ years. I think the best deal is selling him.
Really? So right now, you mean selling him right now is the best move for us?
As a deal.
Oh, okay.
Base A, we're halfway through our window, and we got no other plan to replace him. So even if we'd started this window with a good plan, Arsenal's at where they're at. Arteta's Arsenal are at where they're at. He's all of our goals. We're so vulnerable. It's just such a massive risk to the rest of the project to rip and replace Aubameyang and think you're going to take whatever. Maybe we get 35, 40 million for him. I mean, you can say he's worth 50 million, but with the weird market that's going on at the moment, and then maybe you don't get paid till the end of the window, the idea that you're going to find a smooth way to replace him, pretty tough. So maybe the best option is, if he's happy to be happy at Arsenal, to have him play for 1 more year and forego the 35 million, but not have to sign on to, 300k for what's that, 50 million of extra costs by the time you put in some extra fees and shit. I mean, it's a tough call. You could see why, at least Arteta, from Arteta's standpoint, at the end of the day, it's his money, but it's not his money. He'd lean for keeping the guy for 3 years. My gut feel is we'll get 2 very good years from him. And that's probably, given where Arsenal's at where we're at. We're especially in the middle of this window. I think you go for the 3-year deal. But if you had your shit together, maybe we're never going to get Timo Werner to replace him when we take that 35, 40 million. But if we had our shit together, it wasn't 6 months into Arteta's reign, it was 1.5 years, and we knew where we were going with our team. But we've got a long way even to transition from our style of play. There's just too much hardwired and soft-wired around Aubameyang. I don't think you can do it. It's too much risk. But as a deal on its own feet, I think this is the least financial, medium long-term financially sensible way of spending our money. It's kind of a version of the Ozil thing, but hopefully without the Ozil.
Well, that hopefully is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. You know what I mean? Because obviously I agree with that. But I mean, I think Arsenal fans have talked themselves into the idea there's no way Aubameyang declines significantly during this next contract. And of course, I hope that's the case. Ruling it out entirely is silly. I mean, it's being a Pollyanna. Like, do I hope that he stays at this level for the duration of whatever contract we give him? Of course I do. But you have to acknowledge, when you sign a guy who's 31 years old to an extended deal on huge wages, you're taking on some risk. And we've seen it very, very recently. Now, what I would say, Clive, though, is just like, so let me put it this way. I know this is going to sound a little ridiculous because this summer isn't happening. But if I said to you that this summer we would sign Partey, we would sign Aouar, and we would sign Edouard in addition to the Ceballos loan.
All right,
but we wouldn't re-sign Aubameyang. We'd let him run his contract down, thereby losing his wage at the end of the season, losing Ozil's wage, losing all the other ones I named. And instead of having him on 280 a week, for the next 3 years or even 4 years, we have him 1 more year on a manageable wage. But we've got Edouard. I'm not saying Edouard is Aubameyang, but it's some succession planning. Would you take that summer? Our Party, Edouard, and no new deal for Auba, who plays his way to a free transfer at the end of the season? Would that outcome be better in your mind for long-term Arsenal planning than Party and Aouar, but re-signing Auba to a massive 3 to 4 year deal?
But like financially, they don't balance out, do they? I mean, it's not.
They do if you look at the fact that like the incremental increase in Auba's wages would likely be more than Edouard's entire wage, if you follow me.
Yeah, but you get three players for the one in your scenario
versus 2. I'm giving us Aouar and Party regardless.
Okay.
So I'm saying basically the incremental wage you would have put Auba on, you can get Edouard in. I have to figure out how you get the money for the transfer fee. But look, I'm not saying it's happening. I'm just asking Clive, is that outcome a longer-term, better succession plan than the big deal for Auba?
Yeah, it is from a succession planning point of view, but this is football. And every time I look at my TV screen, we've got the best striker in the league, and he's running through and scoring. Right? So in the end, that feeling of having that player is really important. We were having a similar discussion on the Bayern Munich podcast talking about Lewandowski. People think we're stupid, right? He's core to everything that they are. He's their totem pole. He's everything to them in a go forward. And so basically, for me, football team has its spreadsheet, it has its numbers, and it has its emotional side. And for me, Aubameyang is critical to who we are. What he does, what he delivers, and I actually think you look at the downside. Obviously, again, Elliot, that's what you do. But I actually think he's improving as a player.
Gently put his own.
Actually, if you look at it, he's improving. He is genuinely improving. He's becoming more ruthless. He's just as athletic. He's cleverer. He's been developing in different areas of the pitch. But before, he just run through like a Michael Owen straight over the top. Now he can keep the ball. Now he can time his arrival. This player is actually improving. He's literally improving, and he's doing that with us. And I think he's learning the game almost. And people say you can't learn the game. You got to learn this technique when you're young. I got some absolutely rubbish days. Trust me, he's improved since he's been here. He's improved in his physical environment. He's more comfortable in more areas of the pitch, and he's turning into somebody with a stronger mentality, a mentality that I questioned at Baku even. I thought he was weak. I thought he didn't play well. I thought he was weak in big moments. Now he's turned that around a year later. Semi-final, final, Community Shield, big games, scores, delivers. And I actually think he's going to get better for the next 2 years. And look around, Jamie Vardy, 33. He's just got a new contract at 33. There are anomalies. I don't find this deal an issue at all. It's going to be at 250. He's going to be at 250 for 3 years, inclusive of his last year. So in 2 years' time, we'll be at the door again with 1 year to go. And then he can go into the moonlight if he wants, or he can play out and go into a free transfer and go to Qatar or the US and really get his pension. So I'm not remotely worried. I think it's critical to get us back to the Champions League that we retain him.
Yeah. All right. Look, I don't know that I see it that way, but I love the player. So, am I happy emotionally for this player to stay for several more years? Absolutely. Am I convinced we won't have to look back on this negatively? I'm not convinced. I mean, this is the problem with having a nuanced debate. Now it's going to be presented that, Elliot doesn't want us to re-sign Aubameyang. And I'm not saying that I don't want us to re-sign Aubameyang. I think what I'm saying is that I have concerns that this has more downside than is being represented. And I just think that downside should be at least acknowledged and discussed because it's relevant. And I'm asking
if you got 2 good years out of him, would you be happy?
Yeah, 2 good years out of him if we gave him a 3-year deal. Yeah, I'd probably be happy. But again, I think it's fair to ask, if he's on $280,000 a week and the third year isn't a good year, that can hamstring you. So I don't know. It depends where we are in our process. Let's move on though. I mean, we'll see how this plays out. I just think that there's a world where having him this season, which we absolutely must do, but not committing beyond that could wind up looking right. But again, I love the player. I'd be happy to see him stay. I do want to apologize. I know we're having some audio issues today, and I don't have what's the word, the knowledge or know-how to fix it on the fly. So bear with us. We'll get it sorted out for the next time. So let's talk about Hector Bellerin. And Clive, I'll stick with you for a second. Hector is a player I love emotionally. He's also a player I rate very highly. I think we have started to underrate him, and I think this always happens when a player's out with a long-term injury and they come back and they struggle a bit. But I think there are signs in the last few times we've seen him play that he's coming back closer to the level of his best. The frustration, I think, for people now is they don't want to sell Ainsley Maitland-Niles, and that means we probably do have to sell Hector. We have 3 right backs. It doesn't make sense, from a resource allocation standpoint, to be as bad as we are in midfield and hoarding right backs. We've got to make some moves. I mean, unless you think Maitland-Niles could be the solution in midfield, which there's been no indication we want to use him that way. So how do you feel about the links to PSG, the price that's quoted? Are we selling at the bottom of his value, or are you going to be disappointed? I know you've kind of hinted in the past that you'd be okay with letting go of Bellerin, but are we maybe giving away some value cheaply by selling him at this time?
No, we got around 30 million. I think that's a fair price for me. I think I never worry about this. I've always felt when Cedric came in, everyone said, Maitland-Niles is going. I felt for myself, I felt that actually it was never a sure thing they wouldn't be Bellerin. I've always thought in the back of my mind that Bellerin may go. Because he's, I just feel that he may want to try something different. I mean, he's been here since he was 16. It was 8 years or so. He may want to try something different, and we've grown used to him, and we all love him, etc. But he's been here a long time, and I ask myself, is he going to get significantly better? If he stayed, I'll be happy. But is he going to get significantly better? I'm not so sure. Whereas Maitland-Niles could get significantly better. I think there's a chance of that happening. There's a chance of him also plateauing. There's a chance that we get somebody else in. There's a young right back at PSV called Dumfries. I like the look of him. I'm not convinced that Hector or Maitland-Niles is for the long term. I do think at some point Maitland-Niles will need to be fixed. When we go from a back 3 to a back 4 in probably a few months' time, once we settle down our new centre-backs, I think we'll be looking at a different right-back again, potentially. Somebody who's comfortable in the 4 consistently. And that may mean Maitland-Niles moves on. When his value has increased, when he's got an England cap next to his name, and it's rather than 50 million, it's 35, 40 million. And that's just the way things are. I'm not remotely worried. I'll be gutted to see either of them go. But I know, given the state, given the financial state, and given everything we read, somebody we like is going to go. So who's it going to be? Is it going to be Hector? Is it going to be Lacazette? Is it going to be Maitland-Niles? The ones with the best value are the ones that we like. It's as simple as that, and that's business. The ones that we don't like are the ones that are last out the door. They're the ones that go for 4 or 5 million. In an ideal world, we like all the rubbish ones to go first, or the ones we're done with. But that's not the way it works. The best ones go first. The ones with the most value, the ones with the most market attractability. So yeah, on Hector, I don't want, not one of these people that says, he's injured, he's lost his step, or the rest of it. He's fine. He's got a big personality. He's a big Arsenal player, big Arsenal man. He's absolutely fine. He could be part of this journey if it was allowed to be. But fiscally, we're in a position where that's being challenged. I think he's got some technical issues, but they're not insurmountable. They do limit us slightly. But I also seen some things that he's really improved on in the last few months, in particularly. So it's not the end of the world either way. But, we just got to suck it up, mate. We need to do some stuff in the middle of our pitch. And to do that, we're going to have to turn some things around. We've got a free transfer in who's adequate, and we've got a chance to make 30 million quid, which we can use somewhere else. And that, to me, is smart business.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that the way our squad looks right now and the areas we need to strengthen, if we do need to raise money to strengthen, having Maitland-Niles, Bellerin, and Cedric doesn't make a lot of sense while we're starting El Neni in central midfield, right? So I think we can all agree on that. I do think we are selling Maitland-Niles at a time when his value is the lowest it will be, both because of COVID, but also because of still sort of making his way back from injury. This is a guy who has a top 1 or 2 expected assist season on his record as a right back in the Premier League, 2 top 10 seasons for expected assists and XG buildup. I think he showed the promise of being someone super elite. I'm not sure that he's ever been super elite yet. Is that still in his locker? 25, coming back from a big injury. Some of this is how you project the player out, and a lot of this always comes down to player evaluation. I think Maitland-Niles has shown a lot defensively. Has he shown that he can be great against the smaller teams, that he can be a big part of an attack that works against smaller teams? I'm not sure that's the case. But, Paul, I will ask you, I mean, first of all, how much of a haircut do you think we're taking on Hector by selling this summer, and do you think that's okay? Do you think if it is between Maitland-Niles and Hector, are you okay with it being Hector that leaves the club? I'm going to ask you, Paul, to rejoin the conversation if possible, or not.
Okay. Sorry. All right. Sorry.
Are we disturbing you? I can,
No, I was trying to fix the audio problem single-handedly by muting myself. I think I might have done too good a job.
Okay.
Look, I think this summer in particular, this window is a lot about what the market will allow. And yeah, we get a say in it in terms of who we'd like to sell, but then there's which players are willing to go. And as Clive says, I guess I have this idea that Hector wants to see the world at some stage. So he might just be up for it. And then it's who can get sold in this market. As Clive talked about, there's all the players you'd like to sell, and then there's all the players the market wants to buy. And especially at Arsenal, those are different players. So to some degree, you have to take what you can get. I think 30-something for Bellerin, for all the reasons you laid out, might actually be reasonable in this market, because we don't know if he can reach the ceiling that he had a couple of years ago, and we don't know if he can push any further than that. I do tend to think, and maybe it's because there's more white space to draw on there, that Maitland-Niles, his ceiling from where he's at going forward is there's a bigger gap there, and therefore more value that we can put into that guy. And when we say that he's maybe not a player for a back four or against the big teams, I mean, you could argue that he's only just committed to the idea of being a wing-back, full-back under Arteta, and that if he stays, it's because I never bought into the idea that he was refusing to play full-back or wing-back or saying he hated it. He just mentally thought it was kind of somewhere he was visiting rather than staying and living. If he stays, it's because he understands what Arteta's plans are for him. He can really bet into not just being able to cover his ass defensively and run in the wings, but actually learning how to attack into the attacking third. I mean, he still has all the skills, but he's never he fancies himself as a bit of a winger. But it's been a few years since he's had the chance to play truly an attacking role, or even the midfield role we fancy him for. But Arteta is the guy to work with Maitland-Niles in the final third. I mean, he's particularly good at helping a player understand his final third responsibilities from wide, such as working with Raheem Sterling. I mean, he knows everything to tell Maitland-Niles what to do when he gets into that final third, and he doesn't have to do anything nearly as complicated as what Raheem Sterling had to do. Maybe he doesn't have those skill sets either in the final third, but he could become a very effective both ways, up and down the wings, right full-back or wing-back for us, where he just needs to fill in coolness, calmness, and having a straightforward plan as to what he does when he gets into that final third. I think there's lots of potential for Maitland-Niles to burst through the ceiling we perceive for him as a full-back, wing-back. And that'd be really exciting to see. But I do sense that Bellerin's getting stronger, getting closer back to where he was. So at the end of the day, I think we've screwed it up. We've got 3 potential right-back, full-backs when we only need 2. How do we undo what we did during that January window? I'm not sure. How did we get to that? Was that Maitland-Niles and his agent? Was it Arteta having the wrong idea about players and being too firm on non-negotiables when he came in? Was it the club who had, for whatever reasons, the idea to get Cedric in? I don't know. We're at where we're at. We've got one fullback too many, and we need some money.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think all of us would agree that Cedric is the worst of them and the one we need the least, but we have him, and we're signed on to him for the long term.
And we don't want to be rude to him.
No, I'm fine being rude to him.
He's just different. He's just different to the others.
By different, you mean worthless?
Not as good.
Right? Worthless? Totally, completely worthless? Terrible move, shouldn't have done it? Or no?
Nope.
No. Okay. So look, I just, the thing that's hard for me is I want to be able to express my Cedric opinion, and having kept it so close to the vest, I just hate being this circumspect about giving my opinion on things. But, what I would say with Hector is emotionally, if he went, I wouldn't like it. I like the player emotionally. As Clive always says, none of these guys have to stay, really. If the fee is right, selling him is fine with me, as long as we use that money to strengthen areas where we have to. And that leads us to midfield. We have kept Cedric at the club for another... Not Cedric. As I die a little bit inside. We've kept Ceballos at the club. Clive, I felt that... And I am not a loan fan. I'm not a huge fan of loans. But I felt that in this case, we had to do everything in our power to keep this player at the club this coming season, because the weakness in midfield, even if we make a purchase, was still going to be a problem, that we needed someone who was bedded in and could do the job that Arteta needed to be done. I think he really moved past Xhaka in Project Restart in terms of his importance in midfield and the way he kept things ticking over, progressing the ball. I just... Everything about the way he played for us in Project Restart said to me that we have to have this player back. So, given that it's a loan, do you have any just sort of disappointment or frustration with the move being a little too short term, or do you agree with me that it was a move we had to get done?
I like the fact it's a loan. The player has grown on me. I sat here and when Paul was eulogizing over him, I criticized the player and slapped Paul's opinion back in his head, right? So I'm not going to say that I've always loved him, because I haven't. But since Restart, he's really improved and become more important. But I think he's changed. I think he's far more forward-thinking. I think he's far more challenging. He challenges people. And so, yeah, I've seen a change in the player, and I like the player. So, but I'm not saying we should spend £30 million on him. I'm not convinced that he's quick enough, that he's physical enough to take us to the next level. But he's a player that does more things. And when you think about what else is happening, you think about Torreira, you think about Guendouzi, you think about El Neni. If Xhaka's this important, we've got work to do. Because Xhaka is a good player, a solid player, somebody we definitely rely on. But rely on him too much, I can barely think of a team without him in it. And that's a concern, because he has strengths and weaknesses, but his weaknesses are quite apparent. So for me, we've got so much to do there that we can get a player that's on the way up, improving, that wants to play, that feels aligned to the club. It just makes sense. We just take on no loan fee, we take on his wages. Known to everybody, it just makes too much sense to ignore, given what's happening with Guendouzi and what's going to happen with Torreira as well, and what will happen with El Neni. So we still got things to do. Maybe that's why Maitland-Niles is staying around, to maybe give some cover in there. Willett needs to be defined as a player. Is he going to be an attacking midfielder or a midfielder at the base? Not sure yet. People say he's going to go out on loan. If he goes out on loan, on what instruction is he going to go out on loan? We can't let him send him out on loan until he's defined, or we send him to a club that defines him and brings him back to us as a certain type of player, whether that's a deep line player or an attacking midfield player behind a front line. So, we've got so many things to define. So while we're defining them, Ceballos is known, experienced, been to the club. It just makes sense to do it. But as you know, Elliot, there's other things we need to do, and Ceballos is just the first of maybe 2 to 3 other steps for me.
Yeah, I think that the reason I felt Ceballos had to get done is, without him, in terms of continuity, you've got Xhaka, and that's really it. El Neni, you could say, well, that's continuity. He hasn't been at the club, so he's not continuity. It would be really bare there in terms of having any continuity with what Arteta's been trying to build. And Ceballos moved into such a prominent role in the system we were using. So, I mean, Paul, I know you are excited for this move having been done. I guess, do you agree with Clive, actually, that maybe a loan is better than a permanent move, that the profile player maybe isn't exactly what we'd look for? I look at him as a really talented, just turned 24-year-old, and I don't think you're ever making a huge mistake buying those guys. I mean, you look at Torreira, and the rumors of his exit to add up, if you add up, possible loan fee, I wish it was just a sale, but then the compulsory purchase fee, to basically roughly breaking even on what we spent to bring him in. So I think when you buy these just early prime or pre-prime midfielders, you tend to get your money back unless you way overspend. So I don't think there's much risk to buying him. I would have preferred that. But do you like the loan option maybe a little better, like Clive said?
Yeah, I think it's a great deal. It's a reloan, right? So basically, you're getting him. You've paid for his bedding in period in the first season. That's the real problem with the loan. We kind of wasted 6 months of his loan, and it's the problem with all loans. There's a strong risk they either don't work out or you piss away half of it just working out who he is or him settling in. This guy's ready to go, rock and roll. He's for a team that wants to be ball dominant and to be able to pull strings in midfield and push them back so we can push ourselves up the pitch. He's a great option, or maybe he's the option. Great accelerator of the ball. He was getting better as the season went on. I don't see why he can't get better still. And so what you want is a player who can come in and play alongside him and maybe a little more physical, can cover a little more space so that depending on who the opposition is, we have options to play 2-3 in midfield and keep Ceballos. Now you see, see what happens. We've had a year of a loan with him, and this is the problem, right? You just can't commit to saying his name right. But he's. I think it's great that we got that locked in. I think he's the most exciting part of our midfield by a long way. Gives us all kinds of options. I'd like him a little better when he's playing from deep. The busier he is, the better he is. He's defensively really good, very busy, but he can't cover as much space, obviously, and he doesn't have any recovery pace. So he needs a partner. I like him with Xhaka, but there are even better partners out for him out there. Somebody like, I don't love the Partey deal, but I think he might be a very interesting option as a partner with Ceballos. Somebody with that kind of profile to give us a bit more balance in the midfield, lots of mobility, cover the ground, and allow Danny to focus on doing what he does best, accelerating our play and our passing.
Yeah, I love it. I just think there are times where you have to be pragmatic, and there are times where you have to be strategic. This is more pragmatism than strategy, I think, in the sense that I don't know that a loan for this player solves any problem for us long term. If he really excels and Zidane leaves Madrid, we probably can't get him in the next summer. But from a continuity and pragmatism standpoint, I don't see how we achieve anything this season losing him, especially because while everybody's saying Partey and Auba we're going to get both, it's not even guaranteed we're going to get one. And if the worst case scenario happens and we don't get either, and you don't have Ceballos, your midfield ruins your season no matter what. And then you're in a position where you're like, we have a good front line, we strengthened the defense, and once again, we've let a major department go unsolidified, and now our season's screwed. So, Clive, do you see it that way, that anything we want to achieve this coming season, getting Ceballos back at least gives us a floor to operate on? That without him, because there's no guarantee we can get Partey or want Partey. There's no guarantee we'll get Auba. There's no guarantee we'll strengthen midfield at all. At least having Ceballos in the fold, you have a platform that makes the season have some opportunity, and without him, you don't.
Can you complain if you're just paying his wages, I guess? I just think it's a really good deal.
It's a free transfer. We're just paying somebody's wages who's a Spanish international and has been at Real Madrid, Betis, been at Arsenal. Good player. comes in, everyone knows him, he knows everybody. It's not even worth even talk about. It's just like, good work, Arsenal. Willian, free transfer, good work. Cedric, not everyone likes him, free transfer. There's some smart work going on here. It's all about the outgoings that make it look good. In the end, that's what needs to happen. For me, we've got so many unknowns in midfield, haven't we? We got, Guendouzi, who's, I'm not sure where he's playing for France under 21s, but that's an absolutely massive game for him if he does play in that game, because that's going to advertise him. We're all going to see if he can still play football. If he plays football really well, a market may develop for him. So that is a huge moment for him and a huge moment for the club. Torreira looks as though I've read little things about relationship breakdown and with the manager, and he's going to go back to Italy by the looks of it. It's just a matter of which club. The money looks all right. So that's two young players that we were potentially building our midfield around a year or so ago that are going to disappear quite shortly. So we are in a rebuilding there, and I think everybody knows it's Partey and Aouar that we're all sort of interested in and we like. But the Aouar sort of rumour popped up 2 weeks ago, and I wasn't thinking about him beforehand. And there could be other people that will pop up really quickly, and the scenario changes. I think there's another name out there that we potentially could be looking at, and this could be a front for something else we could be doing. So things change really, really quickly in football, and I just think, okay, we're getting all attached to these two players like we've already got them, and our hopes are pinned on them. But there's lots and lots of players out there that can do similar things. Maybe not as well for me. Those two seem to fit perfectly. But I've managed to convince myself of that. I've only seen one. No, I've actually seen both of them live, actually. I've seen both of them live. I liked Partey immediately. Aouar I thought was a little bit small, but now I watched the game again where I actually saw him live, and he ripped us apart. So I think I wasn't looking at him closely. So that is the type of players that we absolutely need to go to the next level. To be the team Elliot, that you've been screaming for. Those are the two perfect players, and I hope it works out. And I've just got his feeling. I've convinced myself it is going to work out. So just a matter of how we get there and how quickly and how many payments we can defer before they actually come on board.
Well, I'll tell you what didn't work out, this podcast, because between the audio issues and me clearing my throat every 3 seconds, it's been a disaster. So I apologize for that. Mark Thompson is coming up next to give us a full scouting report on Gabriel Magalhaes. And we will come back with a podcast in the future that will have such pristine audio quality that you will have an eargasm listening to it. That is my guarantee to you, dear listener, and my apology for this effort, if you want to call it that. But we will say goodbye and then be joined by Mark Thompson. So Paul's on Twitter, Pause My Pants. Thanks, Pause.
Woohoo!
Clive's on Twitter, Clive PFC. Thanks, Clive.
Thank you very much.
We'll take a short break, play some silly music, and come back with Mark right after this. Stay with us. Okay, we're back, and now I am joined by Mark Thompson. Mark is a data analyst at 23 Sport, and you can find him on Twitter at everyteam_Mark. Hello, Mark.
Hey.
Hey, so I am thrilled to have you on because you did an excellent scouting report of Gabriel Magalhaes, and you have informed me you will not be saying Gabriel's last name, which is Magalhaes, and I will be saying it because I love saying it because Tim taught me, and now I'm going to say it constantly. It is the only challenging pronunciation that I get right on this podcast. So let's start with this, Mark. Just from a strategy standpoint for Arsenal, William Saliba in the fold. Pablo Mari was brought in last January. Obviously, David Luiz is there. Some senior center backs who might be going, Holding and Chambers. Do you think, before we get into the actual scouting of Gabriel, that the move from your standpoint made sense, both short-term and long-term, in terms of what this team needed defensively?
That is a good question. And I think the most comparable situation is probably Manchester United from a few years ago, which may not be a comparison that you are happy with me making. But they had a situation where they had a bunch of kind of middling centre-backs for a really long time, and they never quite knew what to do with it, whether they should kind of stick with the middling centre-backs that they had or to go out and try and get like a really good one. And it seems to me like Arsenal have a bunch of centre-backs that are not completely reliable. And I think that the right thing to do is to upgrade them with slightly more reliable options, even if that means that you have quite a lot still in the squad.
Well, first of all, I will tell you that having finished 8th, we can't turn our nose up at any comparison, let alone to a team that did finish in the Champions League places. So while I may bristle at a comparison to Manchester United, currently I would swap places with them. Now, we did it a little differently. They decided to break world records on a guy who struggles to drag his head around the pitch for 90 minutes. We chose a similarly large, although I would say more strikingly attractive, less giant-headed center back. Well, both in Saliba and Gabriel. When you look down the road at that pairing, and we'll get into sort of the granularity of what you think about Gabriel, but for my money, what I see in 19-year-old Saliba and I believe 22-year-old Gabriel is the future pairing that the club would like to have long-term. So do you believe that that is achievable, that in terms of Gabriel's ceiling and in terms of his partnership with Saliba down the line, that could be a formidable pairing for the long term?
It certainly could be, but I feel like expecting 2 new signings to be the centre-back pairing going forward is like hopeful. And again, Manchester United, Phil Jones, Chris Smalling, I've seen it go wrong before.
Yeah, I mean, that comparison I liked less. So well, let's get into Gabriel, and maybe we can start with the positives. What if he turns out to be sort of the world-class center back we've been craving, alongside the other world-class center back, Saliba, obviously? What are the things about his game that you like, that you see as sort of his unique upside?
Yeah, he's got this really good positional sense when he's around strikers or when strikers are around him, which I think the best way of describing it is kind of with a slightly odd metaphor, where, you know, robots and trying to make robots that are like humans.
Uncanny Valley?
One of the more difficult things from what I've read, which isn't much, so don't quote me on this, is getting like them to hold things in the way that humans can do, because in our hands we have like an extraordinary amount of sensitivity, and being able to properly gauge how much pressure we need to like pick up an egg or pick up a baby or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it's not evident when we do that because we're humans and we do it all the time. But when you see like a robot fail to do it, it's abundantly obvious. Okay. And so with centre backs, when they don't have that kind of sensitivity to where they should position themselves around opponents, you get things where they kind of let the forward drift a little bit too far away, and then they have to kind of like rush up, and maybe they don't get there in time, or maybe they foul the player. Whereas with Gabriel, I think he's just very good at gauging how far he needs to be away from opponents at any moment in time, which I think that's his standout quality. So just positioning generally? Specifically around opponents. I think in open space it's not quite as superb, but it's still kind of perfectly fine. Isn't that sort of like the absolute most fundamental quality to being an excellent center back, though? Like, I mean, because I think that in general, you see players who have all the attributes. They're quick, they can tackle, they're good in the air, but if they're not where they need to be, none of those attributes really can benefit you. So, I mean, how valuable is that? Is that something that, as a foundation, gives you room to really excel? Because I would certainly think that once you're positioned well, the rest of it is pretty straightforward. I mean, I've probably just oversimplified the art of defending there massively. No, I think you're right. I think it's very foundationally good for him to have. And his career's been interesting so far, because I was reading some stuff about him and that he'd struggled to get game time at loan moves that he'd had, which kind of makes it seem strange that he would go straight into the Lille team and kind of be a star and then get the move to Arsenal. But I think that maybe if he's someone who is maybe a little bit more raw in other areas, but he has this really superb foundational aspect in this one particular area, then maybe in some systems that really shines through in ways that it doesn't in others. That's my suspicion.
Okay, so, I mean, one thing about him, obviously, is just he's physically very imposing. So, I mean, how do you feel about the way he uses that big frame and translating that to the Premier League? I mean, it's not the sort of rough and tumble Premier League or English First Division of years gone by, but do you think that he uses that frame effectively and that, you know, is it going to show up most in set pieces? How do you see that sort of trait of his showing up in the Premier League?
Yeah. So one thing that I read, I think, in an Athletic piece on him was someone saying that his heading ability hadn't been great, but it had been improving recently. And watching him, I think that's an impression that I get because he's tall and he seems to judge the trajectory of the ball pretty well. Mm-hmm. But when he's competing with forwards, he isn't always as dominant as you might think his size would make him. But I certainly think that he's very good and he'll be able to handle himself perfectly well. One of the interesting things, actually, is that there were a few times when he was under pressure on the ball in matches where I was watching him where he went down easily under pressure to win fouls. Mm-hmm. And he did so in a kind of realistic way rather than, you know, sometimes when defenders fall down to try and win fouls, they look a bit like it's their first time doing it.
Will he get those calls in the Premier League, though? Because sometimes I feel when you're really big and really strong, you're just allowed to be totally mutilated by the opposition with no recourse.
I think he manages to do it in a way where it looks realistic enough that he'll get it. Like, I think that sometimes it can go the other way as well, where if the big guy goes down, then it must have been something big to fell them. Like small players sometimes get kicked around because they're only small and it doesn't take much to push them over. Whereas I think that he shields the ball quite well and wins those fouls.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, that could be good. I would obviously prefer he just sort of win the ball and distribute the ball cleanly and not have to like buy a foul to get out of trouble, but I'll take it. In terms of pace, like, I mean, we have a guy in Pablo Mari who's very big and not very quick. And we had a guy in Per Mertesacker who was very big and not very quick. Mertesacker was exceptional in terms of his sort of positioning and his tactical understanding. And he was able to use that at Arsenal to be really, I think, an elite center back right until the very end where it started to show up. But ideally, you'd like your center backs to have a little more pace, especially if they're going to be playing in a back three, potentially at times, stepping more into midfield and then having to chase back. So how do you feel about his pace? Can he, what do they say? He moves well for a big man. Would that be apt here?
Yeah, I certainly don't think he's as slow as Mertesacker, so you don't have to worry about that. Maybe accelerating over the first couple of yards, he looks his size, but once he gets up to speed, he looks perfectly fine in that regard as well.
Okay, so not a liability, certainly. I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be the elite pace, but just not a liability, not a situation where he can't get back to cover the ground.
Yeah, no, he won't be that.
So then, I mean, one of the things that has obviously been really super important under Arteta and is a characteristic of our game right now that I think is evolving really nicely is playing out from the back. Playing out from the back is having a moment in the Premier League, period, but it's especially having a moment at Arsenal where a lot of our most memorable goals over the last several months have come from that, especially against Chelsea, against City, against Liverpool in the Community Shield. And I think that we're a mixed bag there. David Luiz is obviously very good at it. There's some speculation that Pablo Mari is pretty good at it, though we haven't really seen enough of him to evaluate. William Saliba, I think, is thought of relatively highly for the way he uses the ball, although we'll probably find that out anon. But in terms of Gabriel using the ball, I think I've read that there are some limitations there, but I've also kind of looked and seen that he distributed long, he distributed very progressively, and that when you're a progressive passer, obviously you're not going to complete it at the same rate that you might if you're just giving the safe pass to your partner or back to the keeper. So how do you feel about him in terms of playing out from the back? Is he one for the long ball, or can he play the short possession football on our way out to beautiful back-to-front goals?
I think in France, there was a specific kind of like left channel ball up to a forward trying to run in behind that the team clearly tried to play. And so that's probably where that comes from. He's a little bit one-footed, kind of more than the average. I think on FB Ref, it's 93% of his passes are with his left foot, and the average for a player is about 85 to 88% with their dominant foot. So
is that true of lefties generally, by the way? Or do you know if they tend to be more strong foot dominant in terms of not using their weaker foot?
There was a StatsBomb article on it, and I can't remember if it was lefties slightly more or slightly less. But for both feet, it's around that 85 to 88% range.
Okay.
So a little bit more one-footed than average. And so if you're thinking about like the elite teams coming up with pressing schemes, then maybe there's a possibility that teams will just kind of figure that out and try and force him onto his weaker foot at any opportunity. But there is some talent there, I think. I'm kind of like reticent to describe him as this ball-playing centre-back because I feel like a lot of centre-backs nowadays are able to play passes between the lines that maybe 5 or 10 years ago we'd have been kind of putting them straight into highlight reels because it was so unusual. Whereas now just the level of ball-playing ability has risen quite a lot. But I think he'd certainly be able to fit into what Arteta is trying to do at Arsenal.
Yeah, because like in my mind's eye, for example, when I think of Maguire, I think of a guy who has struggled with distribution, and maybe that's because there's been some high-profile sort of comical moments for him, which I've loved and embraced. So maybe I've got that wrong. But I mean, I think when you're playing out from the back, it doesn't have to be that you step up around a guy and then break lines with your pass. It can be that you can give it first time to the nearest open man, or that you can turn on the ball and give it to the midfielder standing in front of you. I mean, is he comfortable enough on the ball that he can sort of turn and distribute? I'm not as concerned about, can he do what David Luiz does, which is, the perfectly curved ball over the top to Aubameyang running in. I'm more concerned, can he take the ball under a little bit of pressure and distribute it safely, or is he going to, for lack of a better word, shit the bed if he's pressurized at the back like that?
No, he's fine. He's calm, can receive the ball.
I will take fine.
Yeah, that's kind of my general thought about Arsenal at the moment, that you will take fine, and he's definitely fine.
I've got a sort of final question coming up in just a bit, but before we get there, one thing, I talked to Mohammed at Mo Squared on Twitter. He does some scouting, and he gave us a little rundown on Gabriel for our Patreon side of things. And one thing he referenced, I'm just curious if you've seen this because I thought it was a really interesting description. He talked about like the fluidity of his hips and that he was a little stiff in the way he turned and the way he sort of pivoted in his defensive stance. And I'm curious if you've seen something similar show up when you watch him, in the sense that, like, I know you're on the data side, so maybe it doesn't show up as much in your analysis and research, but like, do you see any like stiffness in the way he turns and moves and tries to defend situations, or is that something that you haven't really observed?
I think not stiffness, but I think given that he's such a big guy, that if he has to kind of change direction quickly and like swing his body around, then it might take a bit, like a split second longer than it would a small nippy guy. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if that was what Mohammed was meaning, but yeah, he seems fairly kind of fluid with his footwork and his body positioning and stuff.
What about in the duels? I mean, I know in the air we talked about, but like, is he a go to ground guy? Is he mostly going to stay on his feet and challenge that way? I mean, one of the things that impressed me so much about Mertesacker, he had just an extraordinary record of not picking up cards for many, many years. He rarely went to ground. He used those long legs and his tactical awareness to really stay on his feet, to ride the challenges and take the ball off people. I mean, is Saliba going to go into those challenges trying to use his big frame and push people off the ball? Is he going to nick it away from people with his feet? Is he going to go to ground and try to use that big frame to cover a lot of space? What's his preferred way to snuff out fires, so to speak, when he's got someone coming one-on-one against him? He
seems to prefer to stand off guys and then wait for them to make a move or wait for them to make a mistake, which is a perfectly legitimate strategy to use. I think maybe sometimes he might hang back a little bit too much. And I think Clive mentioned on a podcast that he likes to go into tackles with his left foot, which is definitely something that I spotted as well. And that can sometimes be a little bit of a problem if the forward goes around to kind of his right hand side, then he'll try and swing his body around to go with the left foot. But yeah, he's a bit more kind of cautious in that regard, staying on his feet.
So let's start to get to the finish line here with sort of what you expect from him this season and who should partner him and how he should play. I mean, if we do go with a back three, could you see him playing right away in Arsenal's back three on presumably the left side of David Luiz as the left-sided center back? That is a position that actually Tierney has taken up quite a bit with Maitland-Niles outside of him, or vice versa at times when they switch. Obviously very, very different profiles there, but that's also been in big games against some of the bigger teams. I mean, I sort of struggle to see these giants in Saliba and Marie and Gabriel being your sort of traditional outside center backs in a three, but I also don't know football. So maybe you can enlighten me here. I mean, how do you see, if we stick with a back three, can you see him playing in that formation to the left of Luiz right away?
I think that you're right to be kind of like wary of someone of his size playing in that role. I mean, he would offer something hugely different to Tierney on the left of a back three. I think he could play it, but you'd be kind of concerned about balls over the top probably and him having to turn and run back towards his goal and how quickly he'd be able to do that.
Well, also he's going to be isolated. Just something that you said that really registers for me. He's going to be isolated more against those players like a Mohamed Salah, more of those tricky wide players. And, based on what you said about standing off and, maybe not getting turned as quickly, like, wouldn't he be playing against the kind of players that he'd be sort of most vulnerable to? Or am I taking a bit of a leap there?
No, that's a fair point. You would kind of worry about him being up against like a Mo Salah.
I mean, anybody's worried about going up against a Mo Salah, but you get my point, right? Any of these sort of wide players, whether it's a Pulisic type, a Mason Mount, a Tony Marshall, and any of those type of people. I mean, that doesn't strike me as the kind of player you want him going head to head with. Yeah,
he seems much more like a back two centre back in a slightly more traditional centre back mold and slightly more traditional role, I think. But I don't think he couldn't play there. I just think it's not what would suit him best. And given that you have Tierney, who's played pretty well in that role anyway, it may not be what would suit Arsenal best.
Well, the other thing that strikes me is that when we played in the back three at times, especially against the smaller teams, those outside center backs have really stepped up into midfield and been part of the possession there, forming either a two behind the central midfielders or even sometimes going beyond them. And I can't imagine this is a player who wants to find himself on the other side of the halfway line, exchanging passes with Granit Xhaka.
No, probably not. I mean, on the ball, he probably could, but in terms of the recovery running and all of that kind of thing, probably not.
All right, well, I mean, obviously we'll see how that develops. I mean, we know that the back three is probably not Arteta's preferred system long term, but it has worked recently, and there's no preseason, and the idea that it's just going to get thrown away to start the new season seems far-fetched to me. So it'd be interesting to see how we try to incorporate him. I guess it didn't even occur to me, but just real quick, not to be overly tedious about back threes, but could he play that central center back role? I mean, is that too much responsibility for distribution and organizing?
I don't think so. I think because the three means that you can share around the load of responsibility for the various tasks a bit more. You could definitely, particularly with the amount of centre-backs that you have at the club, you could definitely come up with a combination of three players who would suit that kind of division of responsibilities pretty well.
Well, the old aphorism about center backs. They say if you have 43 of them, you don't have one. So that's true of us right now. Sorry, I cut you off there, which is on brand for me, but go ahead.
No, I think I'd finished my point anyway.
Oh, good. Okay, so that's a point for me. All right, so last question. In terms of his immediate future, do you see him being Premier League level right now, can come in, can improve the defense, or do you think that he will be a player who needs to be sort of nurtured through his first season and needs some time to develop? How integrated can he be, and is he ready for that?
I think that he would be perfectly good coming into the side now. There are kind of adaptation issues and maybe like slight limitations and stuff that he would work on, but I don't have any. I feel like I've been given an impression of being quite negative on him in over the course of this conversation, and I think that he's like pretty good. Everyone wants to be really excited about their transfers, and I think that he's one that you can be like low key excited about because he's young and he's perfectly good at the moment. And I think that he could definitely do a job straight away. It's just about who he's partnered with and how much you expect him to do being thrown in at the deep end.
Okay. Well, I'm excited for him. I mean, I like this deal. You know, I think the fact is, like, just from a squad building standpoint, Mark, like, I don't know that spending this amount of money on a 22-year-old, big-bodied, sort of physically imposing center back is a big risk. You know, I have a hard time, even if he's not great, and 2 years from now we're looking at renegotiating the contract and we're like, you know what, maybe we're going to sell this guy. I don't see you taking a bath on this financially. So, I mean, just from a sort of squad building, long range kind of project standpoint, do you think this is a good move and the kind of move that for Arsenal and where we are in our development was right for us?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right on that this transfer is unlikely to go badly, not to jinx it, but I can't see a situation where he kind of bombs completely in terms of his performances. And if you do have to sell him in a couple of years, then you'll probably be able to get some decent money from him. And the potential upside of it is that he stays for like 5, 6, however many years and does a perfectly adequate job at centre-back.
I'd take it. Sounds good. So all in all, I mean, it sounds like you're pretty upbeat on this. And that's what I was hoping to get from you. Yeah, I mean, you just overall pretty good? No problems?
Yeah, like a solid like 6 or 7 out of 10.
Okay, I would take that. And I mean, I know it's not why we have you on here, but like 3 years from now, Saliba, Gabriel, center back partnership, you'd be okay with that? You think that could be something special?
Could be. I mean,
it's not as encouraging as I hoped.
Well, it depends what the rest of the team is like. Like, a lot of people don't like when you look at kind of those championship winning teams. There's always a couple of players that you wonder how did they get into this team, and so yeah, they could be really good, but also, even if they are really good, it might not matter if the rest of the team isn't very good. Or if the rest of the team is really great and they're only kind of adequate, then that might still be enough. Yeah,
look, I mean, maybe we'll just start scoring 4 or 5 goals a game and it won't matter who we have playing defensively. So
exactly.
We could always go that way. And then we could sell one of Saliba or Gabriel and just buy another striker, score 5, 6 goals a game. Go back to the Arsene Wenger approach. Mark, I really appreciate it. And, one of the things about asking the right questions in an interview setting like this is sort of understanding the player and understanding the issues, which I don't. So I appreciate you sort of nursing me through it. Mark is on Twitter at everyteam_Mark. You can find his analytics work at times for 23 Sport, although I don't know if you can actually find it because I don't know that it's publicly available. So I take back what I've just said. But regardless, Mark, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I hope we get to do it again.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here.
Yeah, well, there you go. So that's podcast for you, everybody. Certainly can sign up on Patreon, and we've got a couple additional episodes coming, including a mailbag. Next week, we will have our season prediction over Underpod, which will have some listener involvement, and we're going to memorialize it. So at the end of the season, we can find out how right we were, or in some people's cases, how wrong they were, although I'm sure there won't be anyone who's wrong about anything. So international break, just what we wanted. But you know what? The new season is somehow just about upon us, so we can't wait for that. We love you, and we'll talk to you after Arsenal 10. Full of Mills.